An old biker walked into a motorcycle showroom and asked for 40 bikes, in cash. The staff laughed. One demanded proof he could even afford one. Then a door opened in the back, and a single sentence from the manager turned the entire room silent. What he said next would explain everything, and nobody saw it coming. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story.
Sir, I didn't know you were coming today.
The showroom gleamed under banks of overhead lights, the kind of brightness designed to make chrome look like liquid silver. Rows of motorcycles stood in formation across the polished concrete floor, each one catching the light at a slightly different angle, as if competing for attention. The air smelled faintly of leather and fresh paint, that new machine scent that dealerships bottle like perfume. Somewhere near the back, a radio played low under the hum of conversation. Salesmen in pressed shirts trading jokes by the coffee station, a couple debating the merits of two nearly identical bikes. A child pressing his palm against a gas tank just to feel how cold the metal was. It was the kind of morning that ran on its own rhythm. Comfortable, predictable. Nothing about it suggested it would be remembered. Then the glass door at the front swung open, slow and heavy, and the rhythm caught, just for a second, like a record skipping. An old man stepped through. His vest was leather, but not the kind sold on any rack in that building. It had the deep, cracked patina of something worn for decades, soft in places where a body had leaned against it 1,000 times, scarred in others where road and weather had left their marks. His boots were scuffed nearly to the leather's bone, the kind of wear that doesn't come from walking carefully. Gray hair escaped from beneath a riding cap, gone thin at the brim. And when he walked, there was a slight drag to his right leg, not pain exactly, but the memory of it. The kind of limp a man learns to walk through rather than around. He didn't rush. He didn't look around for approval. He simply moved through the doorway the way a man moves through a place he has every right to be standing in, even if nobody else in the room understood why. For a moment, nobody noticed him at all. Then, one by one, they did. A salesman near the coffee station glanced up first, his eyes moving from the old man's boots to his vest to his face, cataloging him in the space of a breath. The conversation by the gas tank quieted. The radio kept playing, but the room around it didn't feel quite as loose as it had 30 seconds earlier. There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a place when people are deciding, without saying so, whether someone belongs. And that silence settled now, brief but unmistakable, draping itself over the chrome and the lights and the rows of waiting motorcycles. It lasted only a few seconds, but a few seconds is enough. A young salesman near the front straightened his collar, exchanged a look with his coworker, the kind of look that needs no translation, and let something flicker across his face. Not quite a smile. Something closer to a smirk, already halfway formed before the old man had said a single word. The old man noticed. He always noticed. 23 years of walking into rooms like this one had taught him exactly what that look meant, and exactly how little it had to do with him. He didn't flinch. He didn't straighten his vest to seem more presentable or explain himself before anyone had asked him to. He simply kept walking, his boots quiet against the polished floor, until he reached the front desk and stopped. Have you ever walked into a room and felt people decide who you were before you said a word? Tell me about it in the comments. I want to hear that story. He set both hands gently on the counter's edge and waited. The young salesman approached the counter the way a man approaches an obligation rather than an opportunity. He took his time getting there, letting his co-workers watch, letting the moment stretch just long enough to make a point. When he finally arrived, his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Can I help you, sir?" The words were polite. The tone underneath them was not. The old man nodded once, calm as still water. "Yes, I'd like to buy 40 motorcycles." For a beat, nothing happened. The salesman blinked, as if waiting for the rest of the sentence. A punchline, a clarification, something that would make the request make sense. When none came, he leaned forward slightly, the way people do when they think they've misheard. 40? 40, the old man repeated. He reached into his vest and produced a folded list, soft at the creases from being carried and unfolded many times before. He set it on the counter and smoothed it flat with 2 fingers. Harley-Davidson Road Kings, top trim, all black. The salesman picked up the list, scanned it, and let out a short laugh, more breath than sound, but enough to carry. 40 Road Kings, top trim. He said it slowly, like he was tasting how absurd it sounded. "Sir, that's the better part of $750,000. "I'm aware." Another salesman, drawn by the sound of laughter, wandered over from the coffee station. He glanced at the list, and then at the old man's boots, then back at the list. And something in his expression hardened into amusement. "This isn't a charity sale, Grandpa," he said, not quite under his breath. "Maybe try the used lot down the street." The first salesman snorted. A third employee drifted closer, drawn by the gathering crowd the way people are always drawn to a moment that promises a story later. He looked the old man over. The cracked leather, the worn cap, the limp he'd noticed on the way in, and let his voice drop into something practiced, something condescending dressed up as professionalism. "Sir, our clients usually arrive in something a little nicer than a rusted pickup. We do have certain standards here." The old man said nothing. He simply folded his hands on the counter and waited, the same stillness in his face that had been there since he walked through the door. It was the silence that seemed to bother them more than anything he could have said. "Do you even know how much 40 bikes cost?" the first salesman pressed, leaning on the counter now, enjoying himself. "I do?" "Then maybe show us some proof." He said it lightly, like a joke that hadn't quite landed yet, glancing at his co-workers for the laugh he expected. It came right on cue, low chuckles rippling through the small crowd that had gathered without quite meaning to. A customer nearby, sensing the shift in the air, pulled out his phone, angling it just slightly, the way people do when they suspect they're about to witness something worth keeping. The salesman straightened, emboldened by the audience. "Let's see your bank account, sir, if you're serious." The laughter swelled. The old man looked at him for a long moment, not angry, not wounded, just looking, the way a man looks at weather he has seen many times before. "You want to see my bank account? Well." The salesman shrugged, palms up, playing to the room now. "If you're claiming you can buy 40 motorcycles, yes." The old man reached into his vest a second time. "If you think you already know how this is about to go, drop your guess in the comments. I promise you it's not what you're expecting." And without another word, he handed it over. The salesman took the bank statement with the exaggerated care of a man handling evidence, holding it slightly away from his body as if it might be contagious. He scanned it once, scoffed under his breath, and passed it to his co-worker, who repeated the same performance. A raised eyebrow here, a smirk there, a comment too quiet to make out, but loud enough in its intention. The old man didn't ask what they found so amusing. He simply stood, hands now empty at his sides, and let them have their moment. He had given them plenty of those over the years. Somewhere beneath the showroom lights, beneath the smell of leather and fresh paint. A different smell rose up in his memory, gasoline and cold concrete. The particular chill of a night spent on a folded cardboard box behind a gas station that had long since stopped existing under that name. 23 years had passed since that night, but the body remembers what the mind tries to file away. He remembered the way the fluorescent sign overhead had buzzed without ever quite going dark, casting a sick yellow light over everything, including him. He remembered counting the cars that passed without stopping. He remembered the cold finding its way through a vest that, even then, had already been old. He remembered, most of all, the particular way people had looked at him then. Not with cruelty, usually, but with something quieter and somehow worse. The look of people deciding, in half a second, that he was someone they didn't need to see. It was not so different from the look on these young faces now. He didn't resent them for it. That had taken him years to learn. That the people doing the looking rarely understood what they were looking at. And that anger spent on their ignorance was anger wasted. He had been on both sides of that look, in a sense. He knew what it felt like to be dismissed, and he knew, now, what it felt like to be underestimated by people who had no idea what their dismissal was about to cost them. So he waited. He didn't reach for the statement to take it back. He didn't raise his voice or straighten his shoulders to perform offense for the small audience gathering near the counter. He simply stood the way he had learned to stand outside that gas station all those years ago. Present, unhurried, absorbing what the moment handed him without letting it move him. One of the salesmen, emboldened by the silence, said something to the others that drew another ripple of laughter, sharper this time. A second employee shook his head slowly, the universal gesture of a man who believes he's seen through something. The customer with the phone shifted his angle slightly, clearly hoping for more. Behind the old man's calm face, the memory lingered a moment longer. A 16-hour shift on aching feet, a coin found in a parking lot that had felt, that night, like a fortune. He had built something out of nights like that. He had built it slowly and quietly, the way most real things get built. None of them knew that yet. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea what you'd already survived, I'd like to know. Tell me in the comments. He simply stood and waited for someone to come back with an answer. A door near the back office clicked open. It was a small sound, barely audible over the radio and the low murmur of the showroom floor. But it carried a kind of weight that made a few heads turn anyway. The sound of someone with authority finally entering a scene that had, until now, belonged entirely to the staff. The showroom manager stepped out, still glancing down at a folder in his hands, the kind of distracted half-attention people give to walking through a familiar space. He took 2 steps, lifted his eyes to scan the floor out of habit more than curiosity, and stopped. For a moment, he didn't move at all. Then his eyes widened, and his whole face changed, the way a man's face changes when he sees something he never expected to see in that particular room, on that particular morning. The folder slipped slightly in his grip before he caught it. "Oh my goodness." The words came out under his breath, almost to himself, before his voice found its full volume. He crossed the showroom floor quickly now, weaving between motorcycles and startled employees, his pace closer to a hurry than a walk. "Sir." Every head on the floor turned at once. The salesman who had been holding the bank statement froze mid-motion, the paper still pinched between 2 fingers. The clipboard one of the female employees had been holding slipped from her hands entirely, clattering against the polished concrete with a sound that seemed, in that suddenly silent room, far louder than it should have been. Nobody moved to pick it up. The manager reached the old man and extended
Welcome.
both hands,
Glad you made it. We're honored to have you
gripping
here.
his in a gesture that was somehow formal and warm at the same time. The handshake of a man greeting someone he deeply respected, not someone he was simply doing business with. "What a wonderful surprise," he said. And there was no performance in it, none of the practiced warmth the staff had been offering all morning. This was something else entirely. "Why didn't anyone tell me you were here?" "I just arrived," the old man said simply. The manager's face had not stopped shifting since he'd looked up, surprise giving way to something closer to delight, the particular brightness of a man seeing someone he hadn't expected to see in far too long. "It's been too long," he said, still holding the old man's hand. "How are you doing?" Behind them, the laughter that had filled the room only minutes earlier had vanished completely, replaced by a silence so total it felt almost physical. The young salesman who had demanded to see the bank account stood frozen near the counter, his hands beginning to tremble at his sides, the color already draining from his face before anyone had explained anything at all. He didn't yet know exactly what he had done, but some instinct, some animal sense of having miscalculated badly, was already settling into his stomach. The manager noticed the strange quiet settling over his staff and glanced between them, his brow furrowing slightly with confusion. What happened? Nobody answered right away. The silence stretched, taut and uncomfortable, until one of the employees finally found enough voice to speak, his words coming out smaller than he probably intended. He said he wanted to buy 40 motorcycles. The manager blinked, processing this, and then did something none of them expected. He laughed. "Only 40? The manager said it lightly, almost fondly, the way a man teases an old friend. But the words landed in the room like stones dropped into still water, rippling outward into a silence that seemed to deepen with every second. He turned toward the staff, and for the first time, his expression sobered into something more serious. "You don't know who this gentleman is?" Nobody spoke. Nobody dared to guess out loud, though something in the air suggested that several of them were already beginning to suspect they had made a terrible mistake. The manager smiled, but it wasn't the smile of a man enjoying his staff's discomfort. It was something gentler than that, pride maybe, or simple affection. If he wanted every motorcycle in this building, he said, he could buy them, all of them, without blinking. The salesman who had asked to see the bank statement felt the floor seem to tilt slightly beneath him. "What?" The word came out barely louder than a breath. The manager turned fully toward the staff now and let the next sentence land exactly as heavy as it deserved to. "This man owns the company." The showroom went utterly still. Somewhere near the back, a woman's clipboard, the one she'd dropped minutes earlier, lay forgotten on the floor, nobody having moved to retrieve it. The salesman's hands, already trembling, seemed to lose what little strength they had left. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The old man, the same man they had laughed at only minutes before, the same man they had told to try the used lot down the street, the same man one of them had openly suggested didn't belong in a room full of expensive machines, stood quietly, letting the truth settle over the room at its own pace. "Everyone," the manager said, gesturing toward him with something close to reverence. "Meet Mr. Walker." Several employees stared at the floor, unable to meet his eyes. The salesman's voice finally returned to him, thin and cracking. I'm sorry, sir." The old man raised a hand gently. "No need." But the manager wasn't finished. He had the look of a man who knew there was more to tell, and who understood exactly how much weight each new piece would carry. And that's not even the most impressive thing about him. The staff looked up now, almost afraid to hear what came next. "Most of you know we donate motorcycles every year," the manager continued. Several employees nodded slowly. They did know that, vaguely, the way people know about charitable programs that exist somewhere in the background of a company they work for. Mr. Walker personally funds that program. Every bike, every year. The old man looked down, faintly embarrassed by the attention, but said nothing to stop him. The manager kept going, his voice softening further with every sentence. For over 20 years, he's operated a home for homeless children. He takes kids off the streets, feeds them, educates them, gives them somewhere safe to actually grow up. The room had gone past silence now, into something closer to stillness. The kind that settles over people when they're recalculating everything they thought they understood about a moment only minutes old. "And when they finish school," the manager said, his eyes drifting toward the rows of motorcycles gleaming under the showroom lights. "He helps them start their lives." He nodded toward the 40 road kings waiting in formation across the floor. "Those," he said quietly, "are for this year's graduates." The room stayed quiet, waiting, the kind of quiet that asks a question without anyone needing to voice it out loud. The old man let it sit a moment longer before he finally spoke. And when he did, his voice carried none of the weight the staff might have expected from a man who had just been revealed to own the building they stood in. 23 years ago, he said, I slept behind a gas station. He said it plainly, the way a man states a fact about the weather, not reaching for sympathy, not softening it for the room. I had nothing. No family. No future I could see from where I was lying. Nobody in the showroom moved. Even the employee who had dropped her clipboard seemed to have forgotten it existed. When things got better, he continued, I started taking in homeless kids, a couple at first. Boys with nowhere else to go, the same way I'd had nowhere else to go. He paused, his eyes drifting briefly to the row of motorcycles waiting under the lights. Most of those boys never had anyone believe in them. Not once. Not from anybody. He looked back at the staff, and his gaze was steady, not accusing, just honest. Some of them slept under bridges before they came to me. Some lived in buildings that should have been condemned years before anyone bothered to condemn them. He let that sit for a second. They didn't have it easy. None of them did. He shifted his weight slightly, favoring the leg that had carried the limp into the room. But they worked hard, he said. They stayed out of trouble, even when trouble would have been the easier road. They went to school. They finished it. They earned every bit of what's coming to them, and I mean that. Earned, not given. His eyes moved once more to the 40 road kings. Now it's my turn to help them start their next chapter. The salesman who had demanded to see his bank account stood frozen, his earlier color still not fully returned to his face. He had laughed at this man less than 15 minutes ago. He had told him to try the used lot down the street. He had asked, in front of a crowd, for proof that he wasn't lying about who he was. And the proof, it turned out, was standing quietly in a room full of people who hadn't bothered to actually look at him. Nobody could meet the old man's eyes. Not because he demanded it. Because the weight of what he'd just said made it difficult to look anywhere at all. He hadn't raised his voice once. He hadn't reached for a single dramatic word. He simply told them what was true, the same way he might have told them the time of day. And somehow that restraint made it land harder than anger's ever could have. He had not come into that showroom to prove anything to anyone. He had come to buy motorcycles for young men who had clawed their way out of nothing, the same nothing he had once known intimately, on a night behind a gas station that no longer existed under that name. The staff who had laughed at him now understood fully what their laughter had actually been aimed at. The old man said nothing further. He simply waited the way he always had, for the room to decide what to do with what he'd given it. The salesman stepped forward. It wasn't a confident step. His legs seemed to carry him forward almost against his own will, the way a person moves when they know something needs to be said, and dread is the only thing slowing them down. He stopped a few feet from the old man, close enough now to really see him. The cracked leather, the worn cap, the steadiness in his eyes that had been there the entire time, long before anyone in the room understood what it meant. "Sir," he said, and his voice cracked on the single word. He tried again. "I judged you because of how you looked." The old man simply nodded, the way a man nods at something he has heard many times before, in many different rooms, from many different people. "Many people do," he said. There was no bitterness in it, just fact. "I'm ashamed of myself," the salesman said, and this time his voice nearly gave out entirely. The old man reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. Not a gesture of forgiveness performed for an audience, but something quieter and more private than that, even with the whole showroom watching. "The important thing," he said, "is learning from it." The salesman's eyes filled, and he didn't try to hide it. Around him, the other employees stood in their own private versions of the same reckoning. The salesman who had mentioned the used lot, the one who'd commented on the rusted pickup, the woman whose clipboard still lay forgotten on the floor. None of them had said a cruel thing out of any real malice. They had simply looked at a man and decided, in under a second, that they already knew everything worth knowing about him. The old man looked around at all of them now, his gaze settling on each face for just a moment before moving to the next. "You never know who someone is," he said simply. Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. The words did exactly what they were meant to do, settling over the room and into each person standing in it. The kind of sentence that follows people out of a building and stays with them long after they've stopped thinking about motorcycles entirely. Outside, the morning carried on the way mornings do, indifferent to what had just happened inside. But inside that showroom, something had shifted permanently. The chrome still gleamed under the lights. The rows of motorcycles still stood in their careful formation, waiting for 40 young men who had earned every one of them. But the people standing among them would remember this morning differently than they had expected to when they walked in. A man in scuffed boots and a faded leather vest had come through a glass door that morning, walking with a slight limp, carrying himself like someone who had seen more roads than most people could imagine. The staff had seen poverty. They had seen weakness. They had seen someone they assumed didn't belong among the chrome and the lights and the price tags. What they had failed to see, until it was nearly too late, was a man who had survived nothing and built everything. A businessman, a mentor, a father in every way that mattered to 40 young men who would ride out of that showroom changed. Nobody remembered the motorcycles by the end of that day, but everyone remembered the lesson. Before you go, has someone ever proven you wrong about who they were? Tell me that story in the comments. I read every single one, but everyone remembered the lesson.